Hi everyone, this is Holly from Hot Humble Pie. Welcome to my channel if you're new, and a big warm hello to my subscribers. Today's video is backed by popular demand. It's a DIY chalk paint part 2, and it's going to give you more ideas how to make simple, easy, and non-toxic chalk paint. Stay tuned. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, I'd love it if you click that button. Now, if you haven't watched the DIY chalk paint video number 1, I recommend that you do, because I'm going to be speaking about things in this video that relate back to that video. I give a lot of important facts in that video that you might find helpful. I talk about the importance of the qualities of chalk paint that we look for when we're trying to DIY one of our own, and we want that opaqueness and we want that chalky look when it dries. So I was thinking about things that we have in the world that might be a suitable substitute for that. So just a quick rehash on part 1. I used to DIY my own homemade makeup, and one of the things I learned was that titanium dioxide was used for the veiling power and to create opaqueness. Now here I was thinking about antacid, how when you hold that it leaves that residue, and of course in antacid we have calcium carbonate. So I'm going to be working with 3 different ingredients today, left over from my makeup days and just from life. Turns out calcium carbonate is something that is used in chalk paint. I didn't know that when I thought of it, but it doesn't surprise me, and it turns out it's one of the main ingredients in chalk that kids play with as well. So here you see me rubbing the kaolin clay on my hand, and it leaves a really nice white residue behind, just like baby powder does or any other kind of white powder, but not all white powders are created equal, as we're going to see here. Another item that I thought would possibly work, or another ingredient that I thought would possibly work, is rice powder. That's what the famous Japanese geisha girls would add to make their face really, really white, along with other things, but this was one of their ingredients, and so I thought, well, maybe that would work. So I'm rubbing it on my hand now, and it does leave a white residue. I do actually use it for face powder, but as you can see, it's nowhere near as thick or strong as the white kaolin clay is. Next, we're going to give the calcium carbonate that I bought on Amazon a try. Now, I bought this a few months ago because I was trying out different calcium carbonates. This one is a food grade one. It said in the description it was a very fine powder. It is no longer available on Amazon. This is the one that I bought. And since this is no longer available today, if I was shopping, I would get this one. I think as long as you stick with a food grade calcium carbonate powder, if you decide to go that route, you're going to be just fine. Kaolin clay is pretty much, you order it, it's just one thing. You don't have to pick different grades or different choices. They do come in different colors though, don't forget that. I think I mentioned that earlier, but you definitely want white kaolin clay. And it turns out there's such a thing as clay paint when I looked it up. I didn't even know this. And it's really popular with like ceramics. So I don't know anything about that kind of paint other than it exists in the ceramic community fan base. I want to say thank you for the people that came on and did give me other suggestions for DIY chalk paint, but I am looking for ingredients that don't have the same warnings as plaster of Paris. Also, a lot of you came on and would ask me, where do I buy this product, on my DIY chalk paint video number 1. And unfortunately, when it comes to crafting supplies like this that you're hunting for, it is a hunt, and the prices, suppliers, even the sizes and brands change month to month. And so if you come on and ask me which one, I'm going to show you which one I'm using today. I'm going to show you which one's available today to substitute it with. What's going to happen next month, I have no idea. So if you're watching this video a year from now, please try and pay attention to the upload date so you don't ask me, because I'm not going to have an answer. Unfortunately, it's sad, but you really do have to get out there with your calculator on your computer and aggressively hunt for the best bargain when you're going to try and DIY something to save money. So with these paints here, I chose these 2 colors because a lot of you had asked me if you could make the chalk paint using different colors. So I thought it would be fun this time to use some with pigment. I'm also going to make some with white because that's the standard chalk paint so many people use. You know, it's a really popular color. So I didn't want to leave that one out. That's going to come later towards the end. I chose these two acrylic paints because when I bought them about 20 years ago, I was so disappointed. They were 88 cents and they were basically a glaze. They weren't, had no opaqueness whatsoever. They were completely transparent. I even put on like really thick layers now so you can see the color and see that it's still transparent. You can see that black board through it. So I don't know if you can tell. Well, you will. As I go through the process, you'll see how transparent and cheap those paints were, which is probably why that company isn't around anymore. So I don't know, but I'm guessing people weren't continuing to invest in those acrylic paints when paints like apple barrel paint that were less money, like at Walmart, and were better at coverage. So just like my previous chalk paint video, this one has very, very minimal editing in because I really want you guys to see the whole process so that you know exactly, I don't know, I just feel like it gives a better feel if you're going to try and make these things at home if it's not heavily edited. So I'm going to start with the kaolin clay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to write, I have little applesauce cups, and so I'm going to do 2 cups with kaolin clay, 2 cups with rice powder, and 2 cups with calcium carbonate. And that's going to be for each color. So one will have the purplish color in, one will have the brown in, and then we're going to go from there. So I always think a really good place to start when you're making DIY chalk paint is a 2-to-1 ratio. Again, I had a lot of people come on and ask me, 2-to-1 is 2 parts paint, 1 part dry. So it doesn't matter whether it's a cup or a teaspoon, it's still just 2-to-1. Whatever you put in of the dry, you double it with the paint. So hopefully that cleared up some confusion as well. And you can make adjustments accordingly. Now, another thing I want to address, because this was also a big question I got frequently on the DIY chalk paint video number 1, is about whether I need to seal it, whether I need primer. The quality of a DIY chalk paint, no matter what video you're watching, is going to totally depend on the quality of paint you start with. So my first video was really designed just for crafters and acrylic paint and just fun little crafts you're doing at home. It wasn't meant to stick on cabinets or furniture. You might be able to get away with it on a side table, but you do definitely have to seal it. And with chalk paint, you can seal it. My opinion, I know they say you can do wax, but in my opinion, I think the best seal for chalk paint and all paints is still a matte polyacrylic spray. The reason people, I think, lean towards wax sometimes is because even the matte polyacrylic clear sprays or clear varnishes, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be the polyacrylic, but those tend to still have a little bit of a sheen, so it kind of messes up that velvety chalk look that you like so much. That's what we're all after. For me, it's okay. It's so marginal that I don't worry about it. But for other people, if you really want to keep it looking dry and chalky, you're going to want to stick with a different kind of sealer like wax. So if you use a high quality latex paint that says it's like an ultra matte paint that includes primer, and then you mix this, whatever you mix in to make a chalky look so that you have a DIY chalk paint, you're not going to need primer if your base paint says it has primer in it. In fact, I suspect the original paint, I think it may have been Annie Sloan who kind of started the whole trend with chalk paint. It used to be, as you know, for those of us that remember, you would get instructions from every paint store that, well, first you got to sand, and first you got to primer, and then you got to paint, and it was such an ordeal to cover a piece of furniture that most people were like, I don't want to do it. It was just so much work. So I used to refinish furniture, and after I was done with the primer, I used to think, gosh, that looks nice. It's just too transparent, and it's too bad it doesn't have a color, because I'd be done. I actually think that soft, chalky look looks good. And I personally think that's how chalk paint came around. Somebody had the bright idea to add something into that primer to create more opaqueness, and then they added pigments and they slapped a label on it, with additives to make sure that those powders didn't clump and that the glide factor was there, the whole bit I've spoken about in part 1. And then they slapped a label on it and called it chalk paint, which is a really cool name too, and made it very trendy and very, very popular. Milk paint's another one. Milk paint sounds so nice. And this is probably why, when chalk paint first came out, one of its big sale pitches revolved around the fact that you didn't need to primer first. The first thing that occurred to me, even back then, I thought that's probably because it is primer. You only don't need to primer if primer's already in it. So If you take primer and you put these, you know, whatever you want to choose that I've shown you in my videos to add to it, and then some pigment, you really can make some beautiful DIY your own chalk paint. You'll end up with some unique colors and you'll save a fortune. So now I'm just going about mixing up the colors, and I'm going to wipe off the little craft stick in between each one because I didn't want any cross contamination. I will say, as far as mixing the rice powder, and I don't know if I said earlier in the video, but not to be confused with rice flour. Rice powder is not rice flour. That mixed in beautifully, nice and smooth, super simple. The kaolin clay mixed in really beautiful, nice and smooth, but strangely enough, the calcium carbonate was clumping and stringing up a little bit. And, you know, I didn't want to cheat. I didn't want to look online, so I just did it the hard way. After, you'll see when I make the white one, I do Google and look online, and then it does suggest that you dissolve the calcium carbonate first in water, just a little bit of water, and then mix it up. But then I did end up with a thinner paint, so I'm going to try less water. I think the trick is minimal amount of water to dissolve the calcium carbonate, minimal. Not what they say in the recipes, like the minimal amount. You just put it in by little drops or little tablespoons, or whatever. You know, I don't know what quantity you're starting with or how much you want to end up with, but go really slow with your water. So that's it. Now I am going to move the video forward here because this is kind of boring just to watch me stirring this. So we're going to fast forward here. Here I'm getting up and attempting to show you kind of what I'm talking about. When you're stirring the calcium carbonate, it almost balls up like there's dry paint in there. When I was stirring it, I would suddenly get like a little snake tail following, like I had put some old paint off of the lid into the new paint. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does. You know, some of the paint that dries on the outer lid, if you get it in your paint, you know how it will contaminate it with a clump. That's what was happening with the calcium carbonate. So definitely dissolve it in water first, and then it works like a charm. And here comes the fun part. Now I start with the rice powder, and then I realize a couple things. I need to move my water to the right because I'm going to be rinsing my brush in between. And I do use two brushes. I use one for the brown and one for the purple, just because the purple pigment is so strong. I, again, don't want any contamination. I just want to see the colors as they are and how they come up. And then the number two problem, I realize I put the kaolin clay on the end, and I should have that in the center, obviously, so that it kind of goes with how I wrote it on the piece of black board. So now I'm painting the kaolin clay, and next we'll be doing the calcium carbonate. And then we're going to be doing the exact same painting sequence with the purple color next. So at this juncture, I'm having two thoughts. One, I'm not really impressed with any of these compared to my baby powder talc recipe. I was like, oh no. And then I try them and I get a big surprise. Look what ends up happening as it starts to dry. So I'm going to hold it up here to show you up close and personal the results that we had. Now the rice powder definitely did make the paints better. They are more opaque and more pronounced. That is probably how they should have been when I bought them. My favorite is the one on the far left, the calcium carbonate. That's looking really good. That looks like chalk paint and a great substitute for my first video. Kaolin clay, I found out after I made this video, was actually that it is an additive that they put in regular paints, but you can see the streaks there. This is why I'm prolonging holding the card up, because I am really shocked. I mixed everything evenly, and it happens on both the brown and the purple. I don't know if you can see it. It's more pronounced on the purple one, so I don't know if you can see it on the brown one. You will if I turn the card a little bit, but those streaks, that's something that happens with the clay. So although kaolin clay is added frequently to paint, I have a feeling there are additional additives in the paint to help with emulsion so that the pigments don't separate and streak like that. In my opinion, all three of them did help with adding opaqueness to the very transparent paints. But my favorite is the calcium carbonate, also known as the antacid. And just like video number 1 in part 1, I thought you all would like to see how it looks when it's painted on glass. Keeping in mind that these paints were actually more like a glaze and totally see-through before I started, that's pretty excellent coverage for one coat. Now we're going to move on to a regular white acrylic paint. The winner for me is clearly calcium carbonate, so I'm going to go ahead and use that to add into regular acrylic white paint. This time I am going to add in 1/4 teaspoon of water to 1/4 teaspoon calcium carbonate, mix it until it's dissolved, and then add 1/2 teaspoon of white acrylic paint. And it's about now that I remember I need to make another black card. So CC is short for calcium carbonate, and this is just the white acrylic paint, plain with nothing in it. And now we're just going to pour in 2 1/2 teaspoons of white acrylic paint to make a total of 1/2 teaspoon of white acrylic paint. Again, it's a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts wet to 1 part dry. It's really strange not to heavily edit my videos. I actually feel foolish here. I'm rinsing my brush. So here we go, you guys. Here comes our big moment. And what you see me doing here is actually trying to spread it out farther because I realize it's on too thick compared to the paint I did with, where it says none. So to be fair, I'm really putting this up to a fair challenge. I want to see if it makes a big difference. So I needed to make it the same thickness, I guess, on either side and the same brush strokes so that we get a more even result. I did not try this, but I have a sneaking suspicion that you could probably take the actual antacid if you can find it in white. It's usually mint flavored, and if you find it at a dollar store, just buy the bottle, put it in your blender when you get home, and then you can dissolve that powder in water and add it to your paint, and it would probably work just fine for a really fast chalk paint in case you don't have access or time to order it online. Of course, I would love to know down below in the comments what you think, but I think the left is definitely a classic chalk paint look. There's a little bit of a difference. It's brighter, it's more opaque, and it's very velvety looking. The acrylic paint is a high quality acrylic paint though. I love my acrylic paint, but if you are a connoisseur of craft chalk paint, you're gonna love that recipe. So now we're gonna go ahead and try it out on some glass. So I decide to do something different than the usual DIY. I decide to make myself a cute little craft supply holder. I didn't have a big white vase that I want to paint at this time. So I have some paint pens stored currently with permanent markers, and I've been wanting to put them in a separate container on my craft table, and I thought this would be a perfect way to do it. I'm just going to wrap some Dollar Tree twine on the top. I'm going to be using the Dollar Tree chalkboard wood stakes, just one, and 2 flowers for embellishment. So I did want to say that I did just do one coat, and it was amazing considering it's glass and one coat and watered down a little bit. So if I had done 2 coats, it would have been like a really thick coverage, but one coat was fine. It worked great. Remember, the higher quality paint you start off with, the more durability it's going to have, and higher quality paint like a latex matte paint is more appropriate for furniture, kitchen cupboards, things like that. And crafting paint, just use acrylic paint. It's going to be a rival against the higher quality brand name chalk paints that you would find in craft stores. And as always, you guys, this is a super cheap paint. When I did the math, it actually came out less than what it cost me to do the first chalk paint DIY video. So whether you're in the USA or Canada or international and you just like the look of this paint, remember, do the math, shop around, and make some really cheap chalk paint. It's an absolutely beautiful finish. And as always, you guys, until the next video, breathe deep, fret not, and do things that make you happy.